14 black celebrities whose cosmetic surgery took a shocking turn. They had fame, money, beauty, and every reason to believe they could fix one small flaw and move on. Instead, for some, that choice led to disfigurement, public humiliation, medical collapse, or death. These are not rumors or tabloid fantasies. These are stories that reveal how fast glamour can turn into horror when the pursuit of perfection goes too far.
Where did that come from?
Stay with me because the deeper this list goes, the darker and more disturbing these celebrity tragedies become. Cardi B. Before the awards, the fashion campaigns, and the global fame, Cardi B was a young woman trying to survive in a world that often treated a woman's body like business capital. In her early 20s, while working as a stripper, she made a decision that would stay with her for years. She later revealed that she paid $800 for illegal butt injections in a basement in Queens. There was no anesthesia, no proper medical setting, and no real protection if something went wrong. She said the pain was so intense she felt like she might pass out, and the injections continued leaking afterward. Even without dramatic headlines, in that exact moment, the danger was already there. It had entered her body and stayed there. For a time, the result may have looked like the kind of exaggerated shape that brought attention, but the long-term cost did not disappear. Years later, Cardi began speaking openly about removing the material. In 2022, she said she had removed 95% of her biopolymers, describing the process as extreme and painful. Then, in January 2024, she went through another stage of removal, showing that these decisions do not always end with one operation and one recovery. Sometimes they return again and again, each time demanding more pain, more money, and more correction. How many young women are still being told that one dangerous shortcut can change everything? That question sits at the center of Cardi B's story. The real damage was not only physical. It began with the belief that her natural body was not enough to get ahead. By the time success arrived, the procedure that once seemed like an opportunity had turned into a burden she still had to undo. Her story is not about glamour. It is about desperation, risk, and the lasting consequences of chasing a body standard through unsafe hands. Wendy Williams. For years, Wendy Williams looked untouchable. She sat in her famous chair with perfect timing, a sharp tongue, and the kind of confidence that made audiences believe she controlled every room she entered. She also spoke more openly than many celebrities about cosmetic work. She acknowledged past breast augmentation, liposuction, and a tummy tuck, and at one point even let viewers watch footage of her getting Botox in her jawline. That openness made it seem as if beauty maintenance was just another part of the job, no different from makeup, wardrobe, or studio lights. Yet that image of command hid a far more fragile reality. As time passed, Wendy's real battles had less to do with enhancement and more to do with health strain and decline. She spoke publicly about Graves' disease and lymphedema, two conditions that affected her body in serious ways. Then her television empire began to crack. Her show ended. Public concern grew louder. The woman who once dominated conversations gradually became the subject of them. Later, the discussion around her health grew even darker as severe cognitive and neurological concerns became part of the public record. What does it feel like when the polished image survives in people's memory longer than the woman inside it can? That is where the sorrow in Wendy Williams' story settles. The deepest wound here is not one operation or one beauty procedure. It is the contrast between relentless upkeep on the outside and growing instability underneath. She spent years in an industry that rewards maintained surfaces and punishes visible decline. In that kind of world, cosmetic work can start to look normal, even necessary, while more important things are quietly slipping away. Her story lingers because it shows how cruel fame can be. A person may spend years preserving the face the world expects, only to discover that the body, the mind, and the life beneath that image cannot be held together forever by appearances alone. Blac Chyna. For years, Blac Chyna built a public image around extremes. Her face, her silhouette, and her overall look were not accidental. They were part of a visual identity that made her instantly recognizable in an era that rewarded exaggeration. The curves were bigger, the features sharper, and the appearance more dramatic than ordinary life ever asks a woman to be. That image brought attention, money, and influence. It also created a trap. By the time she began reversing many of those changes, the process felt less like reinvention and more like a woman trying to recover herself from a version of fame she had once helped build. In 2023, she publicly documented a series of reversals, including dissolving facial fillers, reducing enhancements, and changing features that had become central to her brand. She did not hide behind private recovery. She let people watch. That choice gave her story unusual force because it removed the illusion of effortless glamour. She also spoke openly about having undergone multiple illegal butt injections years earlier, warning other women not to confuse those dangerous shots with medically supervised procedures. What happens when the body that made you famous starts to feel like a mask you no longer recognize? That question sits at the center of her story. What unfolded was not simply a makeover in reverse. It was an emotional undoing. She spoke about wanting to return to Angela White, the woman behind the persona, as if fame had layered so much on top of her that the original self had nearly disappeared underneath it. The sadness here does not come from one bloody emergency or one courtroom ending. It comes from realizing that an image can be profitable and still be deeply alienating. Blac Chyna's story stays powerful because it shows how easily public identity can swallow private identity, and how difficult it can be to reclaim the person beneath a body the world learned to reward. Nina Leakes. Nina Leakes made her name by being too bold to ignore. She was funny, loud, quick, with a comeback, and impossible to shrink inside the frame. That is why her cosmetic history carries a quieter kind of sadness. It was never about one shocking collapse. It was about watching a woman who projected enormous confidence still return to the mirror for edits. She openly discussed having a nose job, liposuction, a breast reduction, and a breast lift. She talked about reducing the size of her chest and refining parts of her body, while still insisting that she wanted to look like herself. That detail matters because it reveals the most subtle pressure of all, not the desire to become someone else, but the urge to become a more camera-approved version of yourself. What makes her story linger is the contradiction inside it. She did not present herself as broken. She did not describe herself as deeply insecure. Instead, she gave the impression of a woman making adjustments in a world where aging, scrutiny, and visibility never stop. Then later came another rhinoplasty, which she said was tied to a medical issue involving cartilage in her nose. Even when an explanation existed, the pattern remained the same. Another correction, another public discussion, another reminder that once appearance becomes part of a career, it is rarely left alone for long. How many women begin with a small change and slowly realize the mirror will never stop asking for more? That is the ache in Nina Leakes' story. Her chapter is not built on catastrophe. It is built on repetition, maintenance, and the exhausting burden of staying present in a culture that studies every feature. She remained glamorous, outspoken, and visibly strong, yet even that strength did not protect her from the pressure to refine what the public could already see. Sometimes the tragedy is not one terrible night. Sometimes it is the endless demand to keep revising a face that was never supposed to be finished. Latto. Latto was still very young when fame taught her that public attention can turn a normal body into a problem overnight. She had money, momentum, and a rising career, but she also had comment sections, criticism, and the kind of online cruelty that hits hardest when a person is just beginning to understand how visible her life has become. She later admitted that after signing her deal at 21 and gaining some weight, the pressure got into her head. Instead of allowing her body to change naturally with adulthood and success, she started seeing it through the eyes of strangers who were eager to judge it. That is the environment in which she decided to get a BBL at 21. The sad part is that the surgery did not buy peace. It did not silence the voices that pushed her there. It simply changed the form of the conversation. People who had once mocked her original shape were still talking, still watching, still using her body as a topic whenever she posted photos or workout clips. Later, she was also honest about how maintaining results became its own obligation, almost like another job attached to being famous. What does it do to a young woman when the same crowd that pushed her to change turns around and punishes her for changing? That is where Lotto's story becomes more than a beauty decision. It becomes a portrait of how quickly insecurity can be manufactured in public. She also spoke about regretting other procedures and realizing that surgery is not a permanent cure for self-doubt. One perceived flaw can be replaced by another, then another, until the body feels less like home and more like a list of adjustments. Her story hits so hard because youth should be a time of ease, experimentation, and growth. Instead, she had to learn early that visibility can strip away that ease and make a woman feel unfinished before she has even had time to grow into herself. K. Michelle. K. Michelle's chapter unfolds like a slow ambush. There was no instant collapse in the beginning, no dramatic emergency room image right away, and no immediate public warning sign that everything had gone wrong. In the early 2000s, she wanted a more exaggerated figure, and later admitted that she turned to illegal injections from a man in Atlanta who was not a doctor. For a while, nothing seemed visibly broken. That deceptive calm is what gives this story its edge. The danger was already in her body, but it stayed hidden long enough to let her believe she had escaped the worst of it. Years passed before the real damage began announcing itself. When it did, it came with pain, migraines, exhaustion, and frightening medical complications. The material had reportedly spread through her body, reaching her legs and damaging tissue. Attempts to remove it only brought more suffering. She eventually endured multiple surgeries, blood transfusions, and the kind of physical aftermath that changed her life far beyond appearance. What had started as a quest for a more dramatic shape turned into a prolonged fight over health function and recovery. How terrifying is it to learn that the thing you chose years ago has been quietly turning against you the entire time? That question gives K. Michelle's story its full weight. She was not simply dealing with one regrettable cosmetic decision. She was confronting a threat that had been sitting inside her for years, moving, spreading, and waiting to become impossible to ignore. What also makes her story powerful is that she chose not to hide once the glamour was gone. She spoke publicly about the damage and described it as one of the worst decisions of her life. Her chapter stands out because it shows that some beauty risks do not arrive with immediate punishment. Sometimes the body keeps the secret until the consequences are severe, and by then the price is measured in surgeries, scars, fear, and the long work of trying to get back what was lost. Tami Roman. Tami Roman's story begins long before any cosmetic procedure entered the picture. The first damage happened in the mind. As a young woman, she absorbed harsh judgments about her body until being thinner stopped feeling like a preference and started feeling like safety. Over time, that mindset deepened into body dysmorphic disorder, a struggle she later discussed with painful honesty. By the time she became widely known, the battle was already inside her. The mirror was no longer neutral. It had become a place where fear, criticism, and self-surveillance all met at once. That emotional history changes the meaning of every procedure that came later. When she eventually spoke about getting butt injections, she did not speak with pride or excitement. She said she hated them. That single admission carries a great deal of weight because it reveals that the procedure did not soothe what had driven her toward it. It only added another layer of regret. This is what makes her story different from a simple makeover gone wrong. The physical choice cannot be separated from the years of mental distortion that came before it. How do you fix the outside when the real wound has been growing unseen on the inside for years? That is the question at the center of Tami Roman's story. Her pain was not only about appearance. It was about living in a body that never felt settled because her self-perception had already been damaged. She spoke about times when people told her she looked too thin, yet part of her mind twisted those warnings into praise because they seemed to confirm she was getting smaller. That is what makes this chapter heartbreaking. The cosmetic regret matters, but the deeper sorrow lies in the fact that no amount of physical alteration could satisfy a mind already trained to see flaws first. Some tragedies happen in one moment. Others take shape over years, quietly hollowing out peace from the inside. Dream Doll. Dream Doll's story is steeped in a kind of regret that arrives late. At first, the choices she made seemed to match the moment. In an era obsessed with exaggerated curves, visible desirability, and online attention, a more dramatic body could look like a professional advantage. But later, she spoke with unusual honesty about why she had done it. She admitted that the reason behind getting work done had little to do with peace, and far more to do with trying to impress the wrong person. That confession changes everything. It means the transformation was not rooted in comfort or self-acceptance. It began in emotional misdirection. As time went on, the body that once seemed useful began to feel heavy, inconvenient, and exhausting to maintain. She spoke about wanting to return to her natural form, going through reductions, and dealing with the strain of living in a shape that no longer felt like freedom. The look that may once have brought compliments and attention started to come with back pain, clothing limitations, and repeated revisions. That is a brutal trade. What was supposed to increase confidence ended up creating more labor, more discomfort, and more distance from the self she had before. How painful is it to realize that the version of you built to be desired is the very version you later want to escape? That is where Dream Doll's story lands hardest. This is not only about surgery. It is about the delayed recognition that a temporary standard can leave behind permanent consequences. She looked back and said she would not have done it if she had known then what she knows now. There is something deeply sad in that kind of hindsight. A person cannot simply step back into the body innocence or mindset she once had. She can only move forward carrying the cost of a decision made in insecurity and live with the knowledge that what once looked like power was in truth a burden waiting to reveal itself. Countess Vaughn. Countess Vaughn's story carries a more intimate kind of damage. It does not rely on one grisly medical crisis to leave its mark. Instead, it grows out of humiliation, repetition, and the slow erosion of self-worth. While working in television, she endured jokes about her size and shape comparisons that made her feel inadequate, and writing that reduced her body to a punchline. Those moments may have looked small to outsiders, but that is often how this kind of harm works. It arrives disguised as humor, then stays long after the audience stops laughing. By the time cosmetic procedures entered the picture, the emotional injury was already well established. She later spoke about seeking liposuction and wanting faster change because she understood what Hollywood preferred to reward. New opportunities were opening, and she felt pressure to meet an image before she could fully claim those opportunities. That is what makes this chapter so sad. The procedure was not just about appearance. It was about years of being taught that her body needed correction before it could be welcomed. How much ridicule does a person have to absorb before fixing herself starts to feel like survival? That question sits in the middle of everything here. On paper, a change in dress size may look like success. In reality, the emotional cost tells a different story. Even after the procedure, the deeper problem was never just the number on a tag. It was the shame that had been planted long before. Countess Vaughn's story remains painful because it shows how the entertainment business can shape a person from the outside in teaching her to view her own body through the cruelest available lens. Not every tragedy ends in an ambulance. Some settle in quietly, convincing a woman that cutting into her body might be easier than continuing to live inside it as it is. Hazel E. Hazel E's story begins with something ordinary enough to sound understandable: a mother wanting her body back after childbirth. That simple desire is what makes everything that followed feel even more unsettling. In 2021, she traveled to Turkey for what was described as a mommy makeover, a combination of procedures intended to restore or reshape the body after pregnancy. On paper, it sounded like the sort of trip many women quietly dream about. A reset, a comeback, a chance to feel familiar in your own skin again. But recovery did not unfold in the hopeful way she had imagined. Soon after the procedure, she began sharing updates from a hospital bed. The mood was not relief. It was fear, pain, exhaustion, and emotional distress. Reports suggested doctors found complications linked not only to the recent surgery, but also to an earlier breast augmentation. What followed was frightening emergency treatment removal of implants and a blood transfusion. Suddenly, a journey meant to restore confidence became a medical ordeal in a foreign country. That shift is what gives the story its emotional force. The contrast is so sharp. She left home hoping to feel repaired and ended up feeling vulnerable in a place where very little was within her control. How quickly can a dream of renewal turn into panic when the body stops cooperating far from home? That question hangs over Hazel-Lee's entire chapter. The sorrow here is not limited to the physical pain. It includes helplessness, guilt, fear, and the humiliation of realizing that something intended to make life feel better has instead destabilized it. She later spoke about the emotional wreckage that lingered long after the procedure itself. Her story remains gripping because it shows how cosmetic choices made in hope can unravel under the weight of complications, especially when distance, prior work, and medical vulnerability all collide at once. Tamika Foster. Tamika Foster's story is terrifying because the main procedure never even began. She traveled to Brazil not to survive a medical emergency, but to undergo liposuction after childbirth, hoping for the kind of physical reset that so many women in the public eye are encouraged to chase. There was a plan. There was an expectation. There was likely the assumption that the biggest question would be recovery. Instead, everything changed under anesthesia before the surgeon even started. She later said she went into cardiac arrest, and in that instant, the goal of cosmetic improvement vanished. The only question left was whether she would live. That detail gives her chapter a uniquely cruel shape. She did not wake up dissatisfied with a result. She woke up after nearly not waking up at all. She was reportedly revived, placed into a medically induced coma, and treated in intensive care. The fact that the intended procedure was never completed almost makes the story feel harsher. There was no transformation to show for the danger, no reward at the end of the risk. Only the knowledge that she had gone searching for a change and came frighteningly close to leaving her children behind. How does a person step into a clinic for a body procedure and come out realizing she almost lost her life before anything even happened? That is the force of Tamika Foster's story. The trauma here is not about vanity or a botched result. It is about proximity to death. Later, she spoke about turning toward more natural methods, including disciplined diet and gradual change, as if the experience had rearranged her entire relationship with beauty and urgency. Her story remains powerful because it strips away the illusion that risk only begins once the cutting starts. Sometimes the most devastating part comes earlier in the sedation, in the unexpected collapse in the split second where a routine plan becomes a family nightmare. Kanye Mbao. Kanye Mbao's story unfolds through accumulation. It is not defined by one isolated procedure, but by the feeling that the work never truly ends. In the entertainment world, she moved through appearance was never a side issue. It was currency, armor, and strategy. Over the years, she spoke about procedures and cosmetic changes with unusual openness, making it clear that maintaining a certain look had become deeply tied to professional survival and public visibility. That alone says something uncomfortable about the industry around her. When beauty stops being personal and starts functioning like job maintenance, the line between choice and pressure becomes much harder to see. What gives her story its sadness is the sense of endless revision. Liposuction, breast work, skin lightening discussions, facial procedures, and later more surgical refinement all fed into the same pattern. Keep adjusting, keep refining, keep staying ahead of the scrutiny. Even when she presented these decisions with humor or confidence, the repetition told its own story. There was always another detail to manage, another feature to improve, another return to the surface, as if the surface could finally be made stable. What kind of peace is possible when every final touch turns into the beginning of another correction? That question sits underneath Kanye Mbao's entire public transformation. She remained glamorous and self-aware, yet the continued changes suggested that glamour alone was never enough to silence the pressure surrounding her. Her story is painful because it exposes a harder truth about visibility, especially for women whose appearance is constantly discussed in relation to desirability, age, status, and color. A person can look in control while still being trapped in a cycle of upkeep. Kanye Mbao's chapter stays with the viewer because it is not about one bad decision. It is about a long chain of decisions made inside a culture that rarely lets a woman believe she has reached a point where she can simply stop. Stella Obasanjo. Stella Obasanjo entered that clinic not as a private citizen, but as Nigeria's First Lady, a woman associated with ceremony, national grief, and political visibility. That public role intensifies every detail of what followed. In 2005, at the age of 59, she traveled to Marbella in Spain for cosmetic surgery connected to weight reduction, often described at the time as a tummy tuck or related body procedure. It should have been a discreet trip. Instead, it became one of the most disturbing and widely discussed endings in this entire collection of stories. The horror of Stella Obasanjo's case lies in the medical details that later emerged. In court, it was heard that during liposuction, a cannula was inserted incorrectly into her abdominal cavity, causing catastrophic internal injuries, including damage to the colon and liver. Reports also described alarming failures in the response once her condition worsened. By the time she was taken to intensive care, it was too late. She died far from home, and the aftermath did not fade quietly. Years later, the surgeon was convicted of negligent homicide. Yet even a conviction could never restore what had already been lost. How does a private beauty procedure end with a national funeral and an entire country asking how this could have happened? That question is why her story continues to resonate so strongly. She had status, access, and visibility that should have placed layers of protection around her. But once a grave surgical error was set in motion, none of that was enough. Stella Obasanjo's story remains one of the most chilling in this group because it strips the fantasy away from elite cosmetic medicine. Luxury surroundings, political importance, and high-level reputation did not prevent fatal consequences. In the end, the operating room reduced everything to the body itself, and the cost was irreversible. Some will say these women made personal choices. Others will argue they were pushed there by an industry, an audience, and a culture that keeps telling women their natural bodies are never enough. That is where this story becomes uncomfortable because the real damage may begin long before the procedure itself. So what do you think, were these tragedies driven by vanity pressure or something far darker hiding underneath celebrity life? Leave your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more powerful, thought-provoking stories from Hollywood's past and present, follow and subscribe to Cine Legacy Vault Hollywood for more unforgettable deep dives.